All right, welcome. So it looks like we're live in here in this group and just getting this live feed happening on the main page because it doesn't seem to be showing up there yet. So bear with me just one moment here. Getting Facebook to talk to everything else, I'm already live. There we go. All right, it's happening. All right, cool. Very good. All right, so welcome aboard. Let me adjust one more thing here. Terrific. All right, so we're into it. So greetings, everybody. It's Dr. Schiller. And I wanted to speak today about this question of, will my fibromyalgia or chronic pain get worse? Because it's something a lot of people worry about. And I ask a lot of questions, and I listen to a lot of people talking about what's going on for them with their fibro and chronic pain. And that's probably one of the most common questions that people ask, and it's understandable. Like, you want to know what's going to happen to you. You read horrible things. You read things that say, this is a relentless disease and you're going to get disabled. You read things that say that, it just keeps getting worse and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no cure. I don't really believe that stuff because I've seen so many cases to the contrary. And from understanding kind of the underlying basis of, well, what is fibromyalgia? What is chronic pain? How does it cause suffering? And how do they lead to things like disability and that whole sort of spiraling cycle of getting disconnected from what matters to you? Because that's frequently the inner fear, right? There's an outer fear of like, this symptoms are horrible and it hurts and it feels horrible. How can I make it stop? And then there's this deeper thing that often gnaws underneath in the background of like, what's going to happen to me in 5 or 10 or 20 or 30 years? Am I going to be suffering even more? Am I going to be unable to do anything and like be with my family or my friends? Am I going to be just stuck in a wheelchair? And it's kind of a terrifying thing. And I want to paint a picture that isn't meant to be all rosy, like, fluffy dogs and unicorns, but it doesn't have to be so bleak. And I want to try to explain why. What I want to try to explain is that there's a lot that's in your hands. And the question of, will I get worse? The answer is, it depends. And it depends on a lot of things. And some of the things it depends on are things that are completely out of your control or knowledge. But some of them are very much in your control. They're choices that you can make. And that's why I want to speak to today. I want to separate out some of the myth from the fact. And I want to share some of the understanding about where does the suffering really come from. Okay, and so with any chronic condition, there's the thing that triggers it. And then there's the actual damage or injury that may have happened to your body. And then there's the way your body and your mind deals with that. And those are separate processes. So, let's focus on fibromyalgia as a example. But a lot of this applies to other chronic pain syndromes, whether it's chronic neuropathic pain or CRPS, or which they used to call RSD, or whether it's chronic back pain or neck pain, whether it's myofascial pain syndrome. I'm going to say fibromyalgia, but I want you to hear your pain syndrome, because a lot of the principles are really overlapping, and fibromyalgia may be just like the worst case, kind of most inclusive pain syndrome, because it includes kind of all of the elements that some of the other ones don't, although not exclusively. So maybe you had a car accident, or maybe you had a surgery that went wrong, or maybe you got really sick with some sort of gastrointestinal illness or pneumonia, or something else happened that progressively led to, first of all, worsening pain, but also potentially worsening other symptoms. If you had an injury like a broken bone or an actual nerve injury from a surgery, you actually have a fixed injury, and that can be a pain generator. And let's talk about the concept of pain generators, because an arthritic knee, a fracture in your back, a injured nerve that continues to fire off signals that are not correct, shingles, or even muscle spasm or sensitization of your tissues. Those are like pain generators. They create a pain symptom, and that pain signal gets carried up to your brain and spinal cord. And in a lot of chronic pain syndromes, what happens is the pain processing symptom gets amplified. The amplifiers turn up, so whatever it is that hurts, whatever it is that's generating pain, the signal gets amplified so it hurts even more. And that same process that creates amplification of the signal, related processes can cause the pain area to spread. And so you may yourself, or maybe you know somebody who had really bad pain after, say, a car injury, and you had neck pain, but then it became shoulder pain and then lower back pain, and it spread to your leg and maybe spread to your whole body. That's in part having to do with the remodeling of the central nervous system, where the pain processing system changes in response to pain. So this process of pain generator and then pain processing. And then there's another process of or another aspect of how does your mind and body respond to the pain? Does it respond to the pain in a way that feeds into it and makes it worse? Or does it respond to the pain in a way that diminishes it and reduces it? And there's a lot of variables that have to do with that. And it's kind of impossible to talk about them all on a Facebook Live. But just to give you the picture that, for instance, a traumatic injury or a traumatic experience where there is a hyperactivity or intensification of the stress response, the fight, flight, freeze response, that can amplify pain. That can also feed into what goes on in the nerves and muscles, right? Because if you touch a hot fire, you're going to pull your hand back right away. Accidentally, you touch the stove or something. It's a reflex. We have reflexes that are protective reflexes all over the body. And if your protective reflex gets activated and stays activated, then what happens is, first of all, you can't really use that limb properly because it's busy withdrawing. And you try to extend it, but your nervous system is trying to withdraw it, and you're working against yourself. And that principle of muscles working against themselves has been proven and demonstrated in a lot of different examples. Chronic low back pain, people frequently, when they measure the actual muscle activation, there's muscles acting against. So a person tries to bend to the left side, and the muscles that are supposed to pull you to the right side are contracting. Imagine if you're trying to bend your arm, that's this muscle, the biceps, and meanwhile, as your triceps is still contracting, you're working against yourself. You're using more force, you're putting pressure into the muscles. That itself can be a pain generator, and it can feed into the abnormal reflexes that come from these protective responses. And protective responses are really a very good general principle to think about. What are your protective responses to your injury, your illness, your pain? And we typically have protective responses at the level of our thoughts, our emotions, the activation of our autonomic nervous system, our fight, flight, freeze on one hand, and our relaxation response on the other. And we have protective responses in our body, like I just described, neuromuscular protective responses, where you touch something hot and you pull back immediately. Well, okay, so let's flesh that out, because if you had hip surgery or knee surgery and it didn't go well and there were infection and inflammation, basically you got a hot fire there all the time. And that's sending a barrage of pain information to your spinal cord that is sending protective response information to the nerves and muscles that are holding and clenching and tightening, reducing blood flow, sensitizing pain processing. We talked a bit about this fight, flight, freeze, danger response, which is more of a perceptually driven thing, although it's also biologically driven. But when there's pain, it's activating the stress response. It's just part of what the body does to protect itself. It hurts, I gotta do something! But if you're in a situation that's unfamiliar, if you're angry with your doctor because he hurt you by doing a bad surgery, if you're angry at your spouse, or if you're angry at your life, or if you're scared of what might come next, that is a stressor, and that creates a certain biology and biochemistry that activates the stress response that can couple it together with the various other chemicals that are involved in how you're thinking and believing about things. Because, for instance, like, I went to a friend's wedding a couple of weeks ago and we were all dancing. It was so much fun. We were so excited for him that he got married. That's a stress response, but it's a joyful stress response. And there's connection, and there's fun, and there's love. And so a stress response with fun and love is very different than a stress response with a sense of uncertainty and fear, mistrust, anger. Oh my gosh, I'm at risk, I'm in danger. Does that make sense to you? And so I encourage you to think through your life and think through the various triggers that may have happened either at the time of your injury or as the pain developed, or as you maybe have gone through various treatments that were helpful or not helpful, or as you've gone through other life experiences. Take it even further back and ask your question of like, well, what was going on in your early life, in your early childhood? Was there a lot of danger? Was there perceived danger? And adverse childhood events. That means being in a war, watching a person be injured or killed, perceiving someone as being injured or killed, losing relatives who died suddenly. Various traumatic mental, emotional, or physical events create a priming of that whole stress response. And so for someone who's had early life priming, either because they were very sick or they witnessed difficult things or they had trauma, physical or emotional, that primes a stress response. And then later in life when that car accident happens, that reactivates that stress response. The prime stress response is all ready to go. And then boom, and then maybe there's another accident, or maybe it's a pneumonia, or maybe it's 2 weeks in the hospital because of a bad infection, or who knows what. But the important thing is to reflect on, have there been threatening traumatic events and experiences that your organism, your whole organism, your mind, your emotions, your body perceives as threatening? On a biochemical level, your immune system has threat response protein patterns that if you have a lot of stress hormones, if you get a toxic exposure, if you've got a lot of neurologic activity of stress, it activates these damage responses and these pathogen responses that trigger certain immune activation processes. So what this is leading to and pointing to is this notion that your stress response and your your immune response are intimately connected with each other. They're both involved in protecting you. Your immune system has two roles: defense and repair. And if you're doing too much defense, you're not doing repair. So if your stress response is on high and it's triggering an immune response, or if you have a prolonged infection, or if you get corona, or if you have a bad reaction to a vaccine, or you have some other infection, if you have chronic leaky gut and intestinal permeability, if you've gotten immune reactivity throughout your body, that interacts with your stress response, and that does a lot of things. It can mess up your hormones. It can make your pain worse. So the picture I'm trying to paint is that there's a tremendous interaction between the triggers that may have created the injury that generated your pain syndrome and the way those impact on the systems of your body that control your metabolism and your metabolic and your biological functioning. Your stress response, the overall health of your gut and your biome and your gut barrier, your immune response, your hormonal responses. And all of these in turn are affecting each other, and all of these in turn are potentially feeding back into the pain syndrome. Let's come back to fibromyalgia, for instance, where the conventional medicine point of view is, well, fibromyalgia is from sensitization of pain pathways. And we don't understand what causes that, and we don't have a cure. But if you actually look at the research, what you see is that there are a whole bunch of different underlying variables that very well could be part of what triggers that pain sensitization process. Immune dysregulation is one of them, because we've learned that, well, what makes the brain hypersensitive to pain? We've got certain immune cells in the brain called glial cells, and when they get activated, they create hypersensitivity of everything your brain is potentially experiencing. And that can contribute to stuff like pain all over your body. It can contribute to stuff like sensitivity to smells. It can contribute to muscle spasms and twitchiness and sort of an overall sense of tightness in your body. It can contribute to mood disorders and anxiety. It potentially can contribute to distractibility and attention deficit. And we understand that immune reactivity can feed into that. Hormonal changes can feed into that. Stress response can feed into that. So we have a lot of biological substrates that point the path towards creating pain sensitization in fibromyalgia. But there's a lot of variability, and there can be variability among people. Some might have one rather than another. Some might not have one of them. So the bottom line is that conventional medicine wants to be able to identify, well, what it is causing this disease, and isn't very comfortable with the way that a lot of us work in functional medicine, which is, well, there's multiple variables that are all interacting with each other, and they're creating an overall shift in the metabolism and the biochemistry, and that's what's driving the disease process of fibromyalgia and fatigue. And there's a lot of evidence to show that, but there's not enough evidence to convince the people who make the clinical practice guidelines that filter down to the rheumatologists and primary care doctors who are basically, practicing according to clinical practice guidelines and practicing according to large randomized double-blind controlled trials. And when you've got multiple factors like that, it's really hard to do that research. And so a lot of us are treating fibromyalgia and having success by treating the underlying variables, some of which I spoke about. So all these underlying variables that can be driving the disease process of fibromyalgia can also be driving the disease process of CRPS, can be driving the disease process of myofascial pain, chronic back pain, chronic neck pain, neuropathy. These biological processes of immune dysregulation, changes in cellular functioning, hormonal changes, central sensitization, overactive stress response, those are like a vicious cycle, snowball rolling downhill, driving pain sensitization and driving the actual worsening of pain itself. So that's part one of this. These are things that worsen pain itself. If you follow conventional wisdom, there's nothing to do about it. If you look at an integrative functional perspective, there's lots you can do about it. There's things you can do about it by reducing stress. There's things you can do about it by healing emotional trauma, by healing your gut, by balancing your biome, by balancing your hormones, by doing safe, non-poisonous things to get sleep, and by using various botanical things that can help you sleep, can help reduce pain and reduce sensitization of pain. Some of us in integrative medicine use low-dose naltrexone, which it doesn't work for everybody, but it basically is an immune modulator that increases your body's natural production of opioids and endorphins and enkephalins, which block pain and reduce inflammation. For a lot of people, that is a game changer for this vicious cycle. For other people, the variables that are driving the vicious cycle are more deeply ingrained, and so they need to do other things, like I talked about in terms of diet, lifestyle, exercise, stress reduction, healing trauma. There are things you can do. And so the most important message I want to give you is don't accept the conventional wisdom. If you're stuck with a chronic illness or chronic pain syndrome, and the answer you're getting is, we've got nothing for you except drugs and procedures which aren't helping you. Don't believe that, because I could tell you hundreds and hundreds of people who have managed to actually significantly improve their well-being by addressing some of these variables I'm talking about. Okay, so that's part one of this, the actual disease process that creates the pain. And it's really important. There's lots you can do about the disease process. If you've had multiple fractures, or you've got such bad arthritis that all of your joints are bone on bone, or you had nerve injuries like traumatic nerve injuries, or you have CRPS, it could be that you can't change that actual disease process. And we don't really know until you start trying some of these things. But the other piece of this that I really want to get over to you that's incredibly important is the things about the way you live your life and the way you live in relation to all those disease factors. Because you may have a painful disease. And the question is, how are you living with it? How are you relating to it? Are you relating and filtering it through a mind and emotional state which is full of catastrophizing and panic and fear? Because if you are, you're doing yourself a disservice. And I'm not judging and blaming you, because it's totally natural to have fear and to catastrophize when all you've been experiencing is pain and it looks like everything's bleak. But everything's not necessarily bleak, and catastrophizing can make it worse. And fear can make it worse, because fear feeds into the cycle. Catastrophizing feeds into that cycle. And that's just the cycle of the pain. Let's talk about pain. Let's talk about function. Function is, what are you doing to get up and go and live your life? There's a thing called fear avoidance. It's like a known thing that happens for people with chronic pain, where it hurts, so I don't want to move. So I avoid moving. And because I avoid moving, my muscles get weaker and my body gets weaker, so it hurts to move. So I don't want to move. So I have pain, so I don't want to move. Do you hear that vicious cycle right there? And so it's incredibly important to distinguish dangerous pain from pain that's just there and not dangerous. Because you potentially have the choice to live and do, even though you have pain. And it's not easy. It's a process. It takes discipline. It takes guidance. It takes inspiration. You got to work at it. But tons of people have done that and are living meaningful lives despite their pain, who have taken their traumatic experiences and gone through the process of post-traumatic growth so that they're living a meaningful life, even though they had the injury. There's a lot to this. And we need to be really cautious that we don't get into a situation where you could start blaming somebody because they're not managing their mind-body variables. Because it's not simple. Because most of us grow up in a culture where it's like, well, everything's supposed to be okay and feel good, right? And if it's not, give me a pill, it'll feel better. Or if it's not, it must be his fault. Or blame somebody else. But really, it's when you start taking responsibility for it. Not in a blaming, shaming way, but just looking at it and being real and going, oh my gosh, this is what's happening in my life. This is not what I expected. This is not what I want. But I do need to work with it, because here's the reality. I fell and I broke my back. I broke my shoulder. I broke my arm. I developed fibromyalgia. I developed CRPS. I developed neuropathy. All right, I got to work with that. How do I work with it? How do I work on my outlook and my mindset? How do I work on my learning to use my body again? I talked a bit about this whole unbalanced abnormal reflexes thing that happens when people get injured, when they have chronic pain, where the reflexes go out of shape. So that's really important, because that can make it really hard to start moving. And you go to the average physical therapist and they don't really know how to work with it necessarily. They're like, orthopedic physical therapy, do it, work hard, go, go, go. But meanwhile, working hard hurts you. Or maybe they don't understand the whole issue of threshold. And let's speak to that for a second. Hang on one second. I'm looking at the, seeing if anybody asked any questions here. There's one really great question here, which is about the threshold and going over the threshold and overdoing it. And this is most relevant to fibromyalgia, but can be relevant to other issues too, where we all have a threshold of how much physical effort we can do before we overdo it and make our muscles hurt and make our body hurt. I could probably run 2 miles and I'd be okay with it. But if I tried to run a marathon, I'd be a wreck. I have a threshold. If I go above that threshold in terms of my amount of time or intensity of activity, I'll actually start hurting myself. If I hurt myself a little, that's how I build muscle and get stronger. And if I do it regularly, I'll build my endurance. If I hurt myself too much, I'll just be a mess. Maybe I'll have a stress fracture or a broken bone. Maybe I'll just be miserable for a week and I won't be able to move. For someone with fibromyalgia and fatigue, that threshold is way down. So it could be that, you can clean the living room, but if you try to clean the whole house, you're going above your threshold and you're going to create a flare-up. Okay, well, what is a flare-up? A flare-up of fibro is when those variables that we talked about before, fight, flight, freeze response, hormonal activity, inflammation, oxidative stress, which is biochemical stress, mitochondrial function, when that stuff gets too overdriven and it creates a vicious cycle where things start to get worse and there starts to create more oxidative stress, more autonomic stress, then you get a flare. And a flare-up is when your system has gone on overdrive. And what do you do about a flare? Well, you can be helpless about it, or you can learn tools and techniques for dealing with it. It's a bit of a segue. I wanted to speak a little bit about one of the things that I share out there in the world, which is a program. It's called Movement Towards Health. And it's really about learning these tools. There's a lot of places to learn these tools. You don't have to do it through Movement Towards Health. But the point is, what we do in that program is we first of all work on mindset. We help you address things and understand whether you got a fear avoidance thing going on, whether you're catastrophizing, whether you're like perfectionist and you need everything to be perfect, and so when things aren't perfect, everything is wrong, and that kind of feeds into like not really going anywhere and not growing and not healing. So mindset is huge. And again, it's not about blaming and shaming, but it's about being aware of, wow, I'm really thinking about this all wrong, and I'm hurting myself. Let me learn how to think about it differently. And you can. You can grow. You can heal. So mindset's part of it. And mindfulness is part of it. Mindfulness is a tool and a practice of developing a different kind of awareness than you're probably used to. Because we all get conditioned to identify a problem and try to fix it. And we struggle and we analyze and we think in an analytical way. Let me figure this out. Let me break it down. Let me judge things as good or bad. I like it. I don't like it. We're doing that automatically 1,000 times a second. And mindfulness is about developing a different part of your brain, which is just present and it's aware. And it's a really deep practice. Because the part of you that's just aware is the part of you that can actually see and understand more deeply what's happening. Mindfulness meditation is also called insight meditation, because it's really about creating the circumstances where you get a spark of insight, where you get this awareness that just teaches you and goes, right, I get it. I found the solution to my problem. Where did it come from? Well, it came from you. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you were struggling and stuck with something, and then like stuck, and then like you go for a walk, or you listen to some music, or you take a nap, or you climb a mountain, or you jump in a pool, and like whoosh, you get your answer. Where did it come from? It's because you stopped struggling, and part of your mind was at work in the background, solving your problem, and it came up and gave you the answer. I started discovering this stuff when I was in college, when I was like studying at MIT, and it was so hard, and like I had noticed that I'd go out and I'd do like a run or whatever it is. I'd go in the pool. I was a big swimmer back then. And like, I would just get answers, you know. I would start hearing and seeing things. And they were true and they were real and they helped me. And it was later that I started studying meditation practices that got me to the same thing. And so I've been doing that for 20 or 30 years and teaching it to people with chronic pain and chronic illness for a couple dozen years and seeing amazing, miraculous things. When you actually shift your mind into a different space. And mindfulness, which you could also call compassionate presence, dissolves mental tension, and it dissolves physical tension, and it dissolves some of the processes that feed into pain amplification. And then when you take mindfulness and you bring it into movement, which is another thing we do in Movement Towards Health, because it's more or less based on Tai Chi, Qigong, which are meditative movements, with a calm, happy, quiet mind, and bringing that calm awareness into the body, relaxing the muscles from the inside out. Moving relaxed muscles takes less energy than moving tense muscles. Moving relaxed muscles is less painful than moving tense muscles. The movements that we do work with really the unity of the whole body. So like you may have gone to a gym and been like, I'm working my biceps, isolate the muscles. Strengthen, 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 isolate, isolate. That's like the mantra in most gyms. And it can be useful for building power if you're healthy, but my sense is that it's a bunch of BS if what you're trying to do is recover from chronic pain and injury. Because there's a unity that's built into your neuromusculoskeletal thing. It's in your brain and your spinal cord. There are patterns of movements that are built in that you come into life with, and you gradually develop them into more sophisticated movement. If you watch an amazing athlete, you know, I'm old, so I'm going to say Michael Jordan, you know. I used to love to just watch him flow through the air. Wayne Gretzky, whoosh, it's flow. How do they do that? It's being present. It's being in reality. It's being focused, but also open. It's being in the whole body and using the body as one unit. You watch a great athlete jump, Every bit of them is moving into that jump. You watch a martial artist break through 10 bricks, every bit of their body is moving through those bricks. That's what we learn to do. Not that I want you breaking bricks or slam dunking. I mean, if you can, that's great. But the point is retraining your body to move. Grabbing hold of your whole system and all the intelligence and wisdom that's in the unity of your body and mind. And that's what we do in this program. We do that based on, me studying this stuff for decades and applying it in various circumstances and looking at it in the context of rehabilitation science and the science of helping people like heal and recover. And that's why I created the program. So I didn't mean to talk about that for so long, but there it goes. I start talking about it, I'm enthusiastic. We're open for another 2 days. We're open to new people. So if it's compelling to you, I encourage you to think about it. Because basically what it's about is those processes in your body and mind that feed into the pain, that feed into the physical dysfunction, the disability, and the loss of belief in yourself, the judgment, the blame, the shame. That's what we work on. And we use various techniques and tools to help you heal those things from the inside out. I like to say there's six things that biological changes that are protective responses that worsen pain and prevent healing. And they're basically an overactive stress response, anxiety and depression, this whole set of biological, gut, brain, hormonal, energy production abnormalities that I talked about. Changes in your connective tissue that happen in response to injury and illness. Changes in your neuromuscular responses, like we've talked about. And then the mindset pieces, especially fear and avoidance and catastrophizing. And those 6 things, I think I counted all 6. I hope I didn't miss one. Let me know if I did. I'll let you know. That's what we work on, And so I identified those things from seeing really 40,000 patient encounters over the more than 25 years of practice. And just seeing over and over again, Mrs. Jones is stuck. What's going on here? Okay, that's sympathetic overdrive, too much fight, flight, freeze. This guy's stuck over here. His connective tissue is messed up and he's got some neuromuscular abnormalities after his hip surgery. Do some stuff there, some hands-on stuff and some movement stuff. Okay, he's better. On and on, the list goes on. But basically it's empiric. It's what I've seen over and over again. And it matches what the underlying preclinical science says. And all of the tools that we use in Movement Toward Health basically have evidence to back them up that say this is good for people with chronic pain and fibromyalgia. So I just want to sum up the big picture because I just said a lot of stuff. There's the disease and the pain process. And then there's the way it affects your behavior and your function. And all of those have things in them that you have some choice about. You can't affect the things you can't choose. You can't choose to affect things you can't change, right? You can't change the accident and you can't change your genetics. And it could be that you can't change the house you live in or who your spouse is or other things that might be difficult and challenging. And what I encourage you to do is find the things that you can change that make sense given your circumstance. And so if there's a chronic widespread pain, fibromyalgia, digestive problems, brain fog thing, then you should be thinking about low-grade inflammation and gut health, autonomic imbalance. I talk about this stuff in a lot of different videos. So look that stuff up about fibromyalgia. But there's a lot of things you can do there, especially bringing your brain and body to a place of quiet and safety. And that's a personal meditative process. It's about you taking hold of your mind-body connection and developing this compassionate presence piece and bringing that into your body and your tissues. And it's really powerful. So I encourage you to find some way to do that that is not just a one-time here and there, but some way to do it that supports you on doing it on a regular basis. You might need community support. You might need a teacher. Find that somewhere because it's not like a one-off thing. I do these meditations that are sort of free meditations every couple of weeks to give people a taste. You could come and do that once every other week. But what you might need is that 3 times a week, you're realigning your system with calm, quiet, healing biology. And so I encourage you to figure out how to do that. Then when it comes to your behavior and your mindset and how you use your body and how your nerve, muscle, skeletal system works, movement training. And I really am a big fan of what you could call mindful movement. And there's a few different ways you can do that. There's stuff like Tai Chi, Qigong, there's yoga. Those three disciplines come from other cultures. You may or may not want to be involved in the, philosophical traditions in those cultures. Some people don't. A lot of my friends and the company I keep aren't interested in that. They're Judeo-Christian people, and they want to stay in something that's not that. That's part of why I do this as well. But in any event, so you find a way to get into one of those practices where you're learning to relate to your body with compassion. You're learning to move from the inside out to meet your endpoint, your boundary with gentleness and gently moving through it and building your tolerance and your threshold. Where you get support around looking at your mindset and thinking about it and processing the way you're perceiving your reality. And making conscious choices about that. That you don't want to catastrophize, that you don't want to believe the fear because you know that your pain's not dangerous because you've seen 7 doctors who've told you it's not. So what I'm overall encouraging is find your path. You got to find your healing path, and it might take time and it might take effort. But you have to ask yourself, what's more important than that? If you keep going like you're going and you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not addressing the metabolic biochemical stuff and the mind-body variables and the musculoskeletal neuromuscular variables, you are likely to get worse. And if you are taking a proactive point of view in addressing those things, you're likely to slow the process. You're likely to build skills that let you deal with it when you have a flare-up or stop a flare-up. You're likely to even potentially turn back the wheel on some of the processes that got you to the point where you are right now. A lot of people come through my program and various programs like it, and they say, oh my gosh, now I can do stuff that I care about. I spend more time with my kids. I spend more time with my grandkids. I'm able to work more. I still have pain, but I'm able to live. I'm able to play the piano. I got somebody who's playing the guitar again, and she thought she'd never play, and she loves it. And so you got to decide, what's your life going to look like if you don't do anything to change, versus what your life might look like if you take some positive proactive steps to wind back those changes and move in a positive direction and heal yourself. So I'm at your service. If you have questions or comments, send me a PM, put a comment in the chat from this video. If you're interested in movement towards health, I encourage you to jump on it immediately because we're closing enrollment on Friday, and then I'm going to jump in and work with the people who are already joined. So let me know how I can help you. I wish you well. May you have blessing, may you have healing, may you have a good life. Take care.